Greetings, book lovers everywhere. I'm E-Train and welcome to E-Train Talks. I'm a 12-year-old literacy and kindness advocate, podcast host, and author interviewer. And speaking of author interviewer, I couldn't put down my award-winning interviewee's heartfelt and profound novel, which I have right here, Attack of the Black Rectangles. Woo! And I actually faced off against this legendary middle grade and YA author on Author Fan Face-Off with Steve Shankin and Stacey Ratner, where she beat me in the bonus round. But there are no hard feelings, only excited feelings. And I'm so thrilled to welcome my amazing guest, winner of the Michael L. Prince Award, the Los Angeles Times Book Prize, the Amelia Walden Award, as well as the Carolyn Field Award, and in 2022, received the Margaret A. Edwards Award. A lot of awards, but all of those awards are incredibly deserved. And I'm just so pleased and excited to welcome the amazing Amy Sarig King.
Woo! Hello. Oh my goodness, E-Train, it's so nice to be here. I had such fun facing off with you, and I'm sorry I beat you. I'm glad there's no hard feelings, and I'm just so happy to be here. You are just such a stunning human being, and I'm thrilled to be hanging out with a fellow kindness advocate.
Well, thank you. And I'm just beyond thrilled to be talking to you. And after losing that Are You There, God, It's Me, Margaret question, still, the name of the book is still in the back of my head. Like, I can't forget. There's no hard feelings, and I'm actually super excited because there's a movie coming out about the books, which is pretty exciting because it's just an awesome read. And
yeah, I just saw that the other day on Judy's Instagram, and I got really excited about it. Yeah.
well, now the pleasure is just truly mine, and of course, all of our listeners, because I know that if they haven't read your books, they're going to love them. And if they already have, they probably really, really enjoyed them. I know I did. And Attack of the Black Rectangles is such an important, relevant, and entertaining read. If you're like me, you've heard a lot about the rise in book censorship and book bannings. But maybe you've never really experienced the kind of book banning that was featured, not necessarily banning, but censorship that was featured in Attack of the Black Rectangles. And we're going to be finding out a little bit about that and a whole lot more in this chat. And my first question is also an interesting fact about Attack of the Black Rectangles. So Mac, the main protagonist, lives in a city with similar landmarks to Amy's. And they even have the exact same ice cream shop. So why did you decide to share a tale with similarities to where you actually live? And is something similar to what happened with Mac and his friends happen in your hometown?
What a great question to start with. Okay, so I live in this cute little town, and it's very different for me. I always lived in rural places on farms and things like this, or at least in rural spots. So when I moved here, I didn't expect to stay in town, but it turns out that I really like it. It's everything's within walking distance, which Marcy, I think, talks about in one of their chats inside the book. But the reason I chose it, well, no, first of all, I set all my books pretty much, at least a majority of my books in Pennsylvania. I'm from Pennsylvania, even though I lived abroad for a long time. I love Pennsylvania, and I like to put it, like, I like to kind of write what I know, in that specific way. But sadly, the reason it just sort of ended up being set in this town is because the censorship that happens in the book, which is a specific censoring of certain words inside of a book called The Devil's Arithmetic by Jane Yolen, which is an absolute classic, actually happened to my child at school in the 5th grade. And so and then I tried to fight it, and I didn't get a great outcome. Or not fight it, but I tried to actually solve it, we'll say, right? Because I came to the table with, hey, I have a new set of books. I can replace your books, and I can get the censored ones pulped. So we can basically take care of this in 10 minutes. You hand me the goods. I'll hand you the goods, and then I'll take the goods to the place to get them destroyed. And nobody nobody really thought it was that important. They laughed at me. Not laughed at me, but they humored me, we'll say, right? And that was about it. And they thought it was kind of just because I was an author that I cared about this thing called intellectual freedom. Of course, this was in 2018. And so at the time, we didn't have the things that you're hearing about now, E-Train, these really big pushes, really big lists of banned books, many of mine included, many of my friends included. And so so it was an accident that I ended up timing it in the middle of this sort of censorship mayhem, but it was absolutely on purpose that I put it in this town. And I think it's because this town does have a lot of strange ordinances. Now, the teacher isn't anywhere close to the actual teacher. I just want to say that I made the teacher to be like the sort of caricature. The teacher who did this in our school is a fantastic teacher. She's actually turned more young people onto reading than I bet you I can count. So I would never want to put her down, and I respect her highly. But the reason I chose to, it just seemed right. It was in their same town, and it just seemed right. The ice cream store is the only thing I named by name, but that's because Greco's ice cream in Lidditz, Pennsylvania is the best ice cream you will ever eat. So if you ever come to Lidditz, Pennsylvania, you got to eat Greco's ice cream. Bring cash. They only accept cash.
Well, I definitely will if I ever come to Pennsylvania. And I think that what you said is so true, like write what you know, because you only know what you know. Um,
Yeah, to a point. I mean, we do have to explore certain things, right? But like I like that's the thing, like what setting, that's a base, right? So for me, if I feel solidly grounded in a setting, but I don't usually usually I mix things, right? My last young adult book, like the park is from this town, but the house is from, Reading, Pennsylvania, but and then there's other things from different places, and then I just kind of put them all together. But this is the first time I solidly stayed in one town, and it just so happens to resemble this town very, very, very much.
well, another thing that I really loved about your story is that Attack of the Black Rectangles wasn't really about book banning per se. Like, we hear all about these massive book bannings, but this was censorship in a way that I'd never really heard about. And I'm sure a lot of readers and teachers and so many people didn't really know existed because you never really, this kind of goes under the radar. So your book is just so important in that way and many other ways as well. And now I also just wanted to ask about book banning and book censorship because you're certainly an expert when it comes to that. You wrote Attack of the Black Rectangles after all. And I've spoken with authors and literacy advocates about the growing number of school boards and communities trying and sadly succeeding in banning books, censoring books, and taking away our intellectual freedom. It's a concern that's not new, definitely not new, but it's really worsening and worsening. And it's popping up so much more than really ever. So will you share your thoughts on the growing number of book bannings across the country, and what can we do to make our voices heard and fight book banning?
Oh, wonderful question. You're right. It is not new. It does go in cycles. And at the moment, what's most worrying is that what we have is a bunch of special interest groups that are being funded politically, of course, by big names who are really, if you look at kind of the other things they're doing, is really sort of population control. I hate to say it, but like mind control, things like this, and really just trying to limit. Let's just put it that way. Look, I've always worked with young people. I love young people, but no matter who I'm working with, I'm here to lift up, widen mind, right? Open mind, lift up. Because the more you know, the more you know. Like that's the more power you have. So even if it's something that, so first of all, the special interest groups, that's where I guess my biggest concern is now, because it's not just a few people, right? It's an organized, kind of thing. That said, there's definitely groups that are being organized to counter this, who are, and a majority of people in this country are for the First Amendment and, in fact, the right to read, including the right to let librarians who are trained for 6 or more years to do their jobs, to provide books in, a school library. And you can also opt out. So the fact that we already have many things in place, and it's funny because, people would think that because I'm all for intellectual freedom, that I've never opted my child out of a book. Or I have opted my child out for a book. I have also sent my child to a private school. I have used these things and they work. So that right there, we already have something in place in case you don't want your child to read a certain book that's in the library. So the fact that it's the rhetoric that comes with the book, the book banning, like children are reading pornography. Oh my goodness, no, they are not. First of all, I work in children's publishing. We don't publish pornography. Let's just start there. The lies that are being told are ridiculous. The idea that kindergarten teachers are teaching, again, really kind of very off color things. No, they're not. No kindergarten teacher, no one gets into kindergarten teaching to do that. Yeah. And to think that people are believing that is kind of crazy. But at the same time, people sometimes believe anything. So what do I think about it? I think it's dangerous because I think it takes away the rights of young people. And I think young people need to be able to explore everything in order to make their minds about who they are and grow up, just like all the people trying to ban books right now got to do. And so lift up, lift up. What you can do about it, as young people, you can write to your school boards. You can go to your school board meetings you sign up. You find out when they are, you sign up for whether it's 3 or 5 minute spot to talk, and then you read a prepared statement that is respectful and talks about, a teacher or a book that really changed your life, why it changed your life, why it's important to read widely, why it's important to read about all different types of people. That's a really big one there, because a lot of these book bans are concentrating specifically on LGBTQ plus people, or people of color, which is really, that was a big rise in this one. It was incredibly racist push, and it still is an incredibly racist push. And they're saying now that it's sort of like I don't know, the rhetoric around it is sort of like, oh, well, there's kind of like two kinds of histories. There's a history that's real, and then there's a history that's I don't know, sort of like falsified to make the real, I don't even know how to explain. It's racist. I'm just going to say it there. The bigots are out, and the bigots are trying to ban books. And therefore, really just saying, I mean, our school board meetings here in this little town are actually getting quite terrible, in that people can just honestly share hate speech about people in the queer community. And it's really quite sad that our board doesn't shut them down. And I know that our board is not alone in that. And I think that hate speech should always be shut down. Especially in a public arena, where school children are present. If you allow hate speech there, what are you doing? So I can talk about that all day, but the biggest thing you can do is write letters and show up for those school board meetings. And if they're censoring a lot of books, or not censoring, if they're banning a lot of books in your school, you can protest. Go on YouTube or go on the internet and find the kids from York Central School District here in Pennsylvania. You'll see a few videos on how they did it. And it was absolutely wonderful, because nobody else could overturn that ban. Not even my university, all of us as professors, we wrote, they wouldn't overturn the ban. What overturned the ban was kids from that school protesting outside. So that's, if it gets that bad, that's where you need to go. But before then, letters and conversation at meetings. We really do need you now, which is a shame, because we're trying to protect you, but we need you.
Well, I think you just brought up so many interesting points, and one of the ones that isn't really talked about, well, actually is kind of talked about a lot, is the fact that parents can, they can't necessarily dictate what a kid can read, but they can choose what their kid can read. Like, there aren't librarians forcing you to read a certain book. Not at all. You, as parents, you have a choice, but, you can't. It's really hard to say, you can dictate, but you can't at the same time, because they're your kids, but you can't just stop them from learning new things and understanding new people.
That's right. And even in class, if a book is required reading in a class, you can opt your child out of that. And I had a special reason to do that in my case, and I absolutely did. It protected, and it worked out just fine. It was really not a big deal at all. And as for anybody forcing, no, you don't have to. One of the interesting things, again, we go back to reading specialists and librarians, people like that, understand, they call it self-censoring. So basically, you pick up a book as a young person, especially, not even at my age. My age, I'll put myself through a whole book, even if I dislike it, right? Sometimes, not much anymore, because time is short. But young people tend to self-censor. If they pick up a book and they feel like, I don't understand this, or I don't like this, or this feels creepy to me, or anything that's just kind of ew, if there's an ew factor for some reason, they usually put it down. That's just how it goes. So I find it interesting, usually when some of the more, we'll say, viewed on YouTube, or the more popular videos of these school board meetings and people complaining and stuff, usually the people that are complaining are really showing more about themselves than they are about the book, because they're assuming that people are going to, or a young person will think A, B, or C about it, when in fact young people read that book all the time and never think of those things. It's just that they thought of it. And so it's, but I think it's the same with anything. I remember when I was actually around your age, and they started to put the parental advisory stickers on music. And I was very lucky to have a very open music household. You could listen to anything. And I was young and listening to, lyrics that might shock people, but honestly, they didn't shock me. I just liked the music. And I still do. It wasn't this terrible thing that people usually said. So it's just kind of interesting that we constantly underestimate young people. And I think that's the biggest thing about banning books and censorship, is that it's an insult to young people, because you guys are smart. And it seems that adults, and I mean, this is sort of my life's work, and this is what I do when I go into schools. I talk to young people of any age, really, and I explain why adults misunderstand. We forget. More importantly, we did this thing called growing up, but sadly, the growing up that was modeled for us, and sadly also modeled for you, but I hope maybe it changes, has been more of an abandonment of our childhood and our teen selves. And I think that's actually one of the saddest things in the world, because as you move forward in life, when you get into your 40s and 50s and old like me, you realize that actually your teen self, if you didn't pay attention to that teen person all the way up, you really are facing a lot of facts that you didn't, I don't know, that you pretended didn't happen. So sometimes it's just because, oh gosh, it was embarrassing. Yes, of course, puberty is always a little embarrassing. But if you throw it away, that means you're abandoning not only all the teenagers in your life, but also yourself as a teenager. And it's really quite sad. So I kind of, I always kept a teenager in me or with me. So I feel good about it now in my 50s, because I know who I am. And I wasn't ever pretending to be cooler.
Yeah.
I was always just a nerd. But anyway, yeah. So censorship, yep. There's a lot to say about it. But at the moment,
Definitely.
The biggest thing is that, listen, man, y'all deserve to read everything. Somebody challenged me on when I was on tour. They were like, well, would you keep this, this terrible, title in the library? And it was specifically, it's a book called Mein Kampf. It was written by Adolf Hitler. It's terrible. It's you can imagine what it is. But it's also, if you ask me, I mean, my life journey and my writing is always trying to solve a problem. And solve the biggest problem for me is hate. And that connects to shame, which is a big part of Attack of the Black Rectangles, right? So I'm always trying to find the root to hate. So if I can find it, so when I think of a book like the one I just mentioned, right, and when I think about something like Nazism, a book like that's a key to the lock of hate. Why would I not read that? It's gross, it's horrible, but why not understand where that brain is coming from, so that you can go in and go, okay, it's shame. Let's try and figure out how we can eradicate shame through our books. And that's what I've been trying to do with my work. So,
Well,
you have to read all different sides of things to have that open mind.
well, before we go to the next question, I think that what you just brought up is one of the most compelling debates, in my opinion, and one of the most important, and one, I guess not necessarily one-sided, but there are two sides to it. One is we need to read books that are false so we can understand where people are coming from and learn to combat that hate. But there are also other people that say that we shouldn't read those lies, because then people will begin to believe those lies. I feel like the book banning debate, banning books is horrible, but I don't know, it seems kind of interesting and something that's really just wow to learn about.
Yeah. In the end, I think, E-Train, it's all about conversation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if a book sparks conversation versus shutting down the conversation, open up the conversation, because usually underneath it is something that we don't talk about in society, right? So, and that's interesting. Look at the reasoning behind banning books. Most of the time it's oh, well, it's the thing we don't want to talk about. Well, what is it, right? Usually it's one of the things that, look, there isn't a 12-year-old on the planet, or at least in the country, I would say, that doesn't know what sex is, or at least doesn't think they know what sex is, right?
Yeah.
And so they know what the word means, they know that, but the fact that I just said that out loud could really upset some people because they haven't spoken about it yet, or something like this. And in fact, a safe child is one that's prepared for the world. And so I think that there is that line that we walk. But for me, it's all about that conversation. There are books that are lauded and still absolutely in the canon, and they are more than a little problematic. So people are like, oh, we should ban those books. I'm like, oh, heck no, read the books, then have a really great conversation afterward to talk about why it's a little problematic, why it's a lot problematic, and what the author could have done if the book was written, put it in context. People want to ban Huck Finn. Oh my goodness, Huck Finn is one of the most beautiful anti-racist books there is. Don't read it aloud in class in the 21st century. Heck no. But it's a beautiful book, and Mark Twain really meant it for if you put it in context, it works. If you pull it out of context and you start reading it aloud in class, it's a problem. But yeah, we could go on about that topic all day long. Super, but conversation's everything, and talking to young people's is absolutely the most important thing in the world, actually.
100%. And speaking of conversations, I think that Mac is probably one of my favorite protagonists just because of the one question. Like, I mean, there's so many reasons, but one of the big ones was at the beginning of the book when they were going to Independence Hall. You also mentioned this. It was one of the questions in the author fan face-off. So Mac asks, how many of the signers of the Declaration of Independence owned slaves? That's just one example of his fiery spirit, but also the fact that he wants to know everything. Even if some of the facts might upset people, he wants to know everything. And I think I might know the answer, but I still just want you to answer. Does Mac's spirit come from yours?
Oh, that's a compliment. That's a compliment hidden
Yeah.
inside of a question. Thanks, E-Train.
Yeah.
Let's see. I guess a part of it is, I mean, I don't know if I would have been as gutsy as that, but I suppose, yeah. I mean, if I was there right now, I would ask that question for sure. I'm not sure if I would have when I was Mac's age, but yeah, I have a joke because the name I write under, well, with this book, it's my full name, Amy Sarig King, but for my young adult books, I write under A.S. King, which spells asking, which I always thought was funny. That's why I chose it, because I was always asking questions. So I think that, yes, maybe he is fashioned after that. Part of him comes from me for sure. I guess. And not just me. I mean, my kids, and a lot of the students I've known, but me and my kids for sure. I think we're all like that. We raise our hands. We're the one that the teacher's like, anybody other than Amy? Like, that one. That was me.
Yeah.
For a while, I might have thought my name was anybody other than Amy. And my kids had that same experience in school. So I think that we are the kind of people that raise our hands and ask questions. Yeah.
That happens to me all the time, like in elementary school and middle school. So I can totally relate. And I don't know why I didn't notice, but I just noticed today, like, you're asking. Like,
yeah,
that's your email. And yeah. I love that because you really, I guess you were given the most amazing initials and last name for life.
Yeah, well, I mean, the King is my married name, though I'm not married anymore. But I kept it because, well, for a bunch of reasons, and because it's just a pain not to. And I had that name for 30 years. So, but I remember driving to the Social Security office in the 90s and going, "Oh my gosh, my initials spell something now. This is going to be awesome!" And then going from there. So yes, yeah, I got lucky with that.
I really admire the fact that you included like domestic abuse from Mac's dad towards his wife and Mac. So Mac's dad lies to Mac about everything he's doing. He tries to make everything seem okay when it's not. He tells Mac that his car is a spaceship. He confuses Mac. And I just think that including the side tale of everything Mac's dad did to his family made your story even more powerful. Like, I don't know how it can be more powerful and more impactful and more moving, but you did that. So you tackle a sensitive and important topic in a way that kids can understand, but also in a super profound way. And was there someone who inspired Mac's father's character? And also, how can we end the stigma of domestic violence?
Ooh, that's a big one. All right. Yeah. So I'm going to start with I put domestic violence in a lot of my books. And it's one of the hardest things to write because in real life, it's hidden. It's always hidden. One of the reasons it's hidden is that we are taught from a very early age to make excuses for violent men in our culture, period. So in the case of Mac's dad, he acted as a kind of accidental test. In this book. I did not mean for this to happen. I thought everyone would see that he is clearly at least an erratic man who doesn't have respect, at least for his wife and child. And therefore, he's difficult. There's got a lot of words we can use for him, But what's funny is how quickly a lot of people jump to, oh, he's got a mental illness. And I suppose if you read my work, that makes sense. Because, my last middle grade book, The Year We Fell from Space, did have a father who suffered from depression and had anger as part of that, because sometimes depression manifests that way. But it was named. Just for listeners out there, as a writer and as a teacher of writing for young people, when you write a mental illness, it's not a plot point. And that's not why no, that's very disrespectful. As someone who works in the mental health community and volunteers in the mental health community, it's important that we respect people enough who have a mental illness that we name it if we put it in a book. So that's one of the weird unsaid hints in this book, because it's never said. We're always wondering. And you know what? With abusive people, it's the exact experience. You're always wondering, is this person serious? Is he really going to be here on Friday? Is he really serious about this? Why is he doing this? I don't understand. That is what life with a domestic abuser feels like all the time. You really don't know what's coming next. So that's how I try to mirror it into the book. I have had many a person say, oh, well, mentally ill father. I'm like, really? Read it again. And when you read it again and you have the right lens on your eyeballs, you're like, oh my goodness, everything he does is very controlling and kind of mean. And you can tell everybody's tense. He's intimidating. Those sorts of things. So it's super important to put this in a book. And I'll tell you why. It's so common, E-Train. It's so common. It's happening to your friends. It happened to my friends. It's all over the place, and we don't talk about it. And the reason we still have it is because we don't talk about it, and we don't just name it. We don't just say, because a lot of times it'll be like, oh, well, this person's treating his family poorly. He's an abuser or something. They'll be like, well, yeah, but he keeps a job. Look, I don't care.
Yeah.
The bottom line is, look, if you're having this happen to you, the answer is someone, that's wrong, period. I'm tired of hearing the excuses. And we do it all the time with movie stars, all the time with, that kind of stuff. As for, so is Mac's dad like anybody? Yeah, he's like domestic abusers I've known. Every single one. I mean, seriously, I've known many. And I gave all of them a chance because I tend to be somebody who does that. And then I learned not to very late in my life after I was 50. I highly recommend that nobody waits that long to be able to go, oh, that person just showed me who they are. I will believe it and move on and spend my time with healthy people, again, who lift up and who support and who are good and don't rip down and don't hurt you and you're not afraid, But it's going to take a long time to get to that place in this culture. This culture is really, really messy when it comes to this. And yet it's as simple as can be. And of course, he didn't punch anybody. And that's the big one, right? That's the big one. It's like, well, he didn't punch anybody. He can't be abusive. Oh, goodness. No. He broke things that were somebody else's. He stole things that were somebody else's. And he's an erratic man who is clearly intimidating. And more importantly, he's manipulating his child. That's really quite bad. Quite bad.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things here just that show that, and I think that I want young people, if they're in that situation, to see that I see them. I see what they're going through, and that it is possible to get the heck out of there. You know what I mean? And it also gives you a good idea that, you know what, one solid, stable parent is okay, is enough. And as a single mom, I can say that sometimes that somebody telling me that really, really made me feel like, oh, okay, good. This is going to be okay. You know what I mean? But one solid, stable parent is more than enough, So thank you for bringing that up, because it's really important we talk about this, especially with young people. It's very simple. It's just that, hopefully people like that can get help, but a lot of times they don't, because it's a mindset problem. It's not a chemical problem inside the brain. It's a mindset problem.
Yeah.
So, yes. So thank you.
Well, I have to admit, I didn't notice that. I didn't look at the signs. I didn't read with the right eye. And it was through conversation that I really discovered that the dad was intimidating, that it was abuse, because abuse isn't just physically hurting people. It can be emotionally, and sometimes it can be physically. And I feel like that's really a huge stigma. You hide it, and you make everything feel like it's okay. So thank you so much for bringing that up in your book.
Yeah, it causes shame. It causes shame. What's interesting as well is abusers often, they do it from a shame. They have shame, but they won't express the shame. So then they do this, and then guess who feels shame? Their families. So what does Mac have? Shame.
Yes.
What does Mac's mom have? Shame. They both felt shame when they got robbed. Why would you feel shame when someone else robs your things? It's just
Exactly.
a cycle, right? It's weird, but it's true. So, and if we can eradicate shame, then we go back to what I said before, right? We can
Yeah.
eradicate all kinds of things, man. It's a
Hmm.
tough one, but there you go.
I'm sure that there are a lot of kids out there and adults listening who'd also like to use their voices because even adults, I don't want my kids saying this, but even adults, they sometimes are afraid to speak up about
Oh,
what they
yes.
care about. And I'm just curious if you could share some examples of things that we can do to use our voice and also our courage to stand up for what's right.
Oh, well, I mean, the cool thing about standing up for what's right, a lot of times, depending on the cause, there's usually an easy way in, right? So for me, right, I do work with the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And we were like, how does that fit in? And it was just a matter of, Facebook does this thing when you're on Facebook and it's like, hey, it's your birthday soon. You want to raise money for anyone? And I was like, sure. And so I found the Pennsylvania Coalition of Domestic Violence. I raised money quite quickly, and they kind of got in touch and were like, whoa, you raised a lot of money for us. Thanks. And I'm like, oh, dude, thanks for getting in touch. Can I do anything for you guys? And so last year, during February, which is Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month, I did a Q&A and did some stuff for them. And so it didn't feel like it was easy work. We'll put it that way. It's easy to get in touch, easy to do. So it's not that difficult. So if you are somebody who's a little shy about it, there are local places where you can do even small things. I mean, all volunteer or all nonprofits need volunteers. I'm a lifelong volunteer, and it's one of the things that if we ever talk about, like, how do you write a book? I always like, oh, you read a lot, you write a lot, and you volunteer. And people are always like, you volunteer? What does that have to do with it? I'm like, because you're going to meet people you would never meet any other way unless you were volunteering. And that really, honestly, I volunteered in so many different things that holds true for everything. So how to get involved? Find those nonprofits, find those organizations, and find out what types of things you can do as a volunteer, even if it's just small. And sometimes if you're shy or if you're an introvert and you don't really want to be around other people, sometimes there are things you can do by yourself.
Yeah.
But let's see. So I mean, there's that. There's always, like if we're on social media, yeah, retweet, follow those causes, retweet those. I retweet, things that are of interest to the topics that I tend to usually talk about, which is, staying safe, domestic violence, and teen dating violence, which, I mean, the numbers are crazy, what is it? 1 in 3 people have experienced teen dating violence. That means before they leave high school, before they leave middle school, sometimes they've experienced that and are carrying that shame, right? So like,
Yeah.
whatever.
Is there something on your writing bucket list that you hope to one day um maybe check off in the future? Like maybe meeting president the president or something like that. I don't know. It could be
Oh,
big or small.
Oh, I have some bucket list things. It's funny because I never think about those things, right? Like I never think about awards or meeting a president or meeting. I would love to meet the Librarian of Congress and go and hang out
Hmm.
with them for a day, that kind of stuff. But that's not really my bucket list. Is always, because I'm an artist. It's always what I want to branch out and do, right? So I'm working on a graphic. What would you call it? I guess it is a graphic memoir, but it's more like it's a speculative memoir because I am a surrealist. I'm a weirdo. So in my young adult work, I write more surrealist work. So I take a lot of risks in that kind of space. Not always, but I've written some pretty straight surrealist novels, which is great because that's what I always wanted to write. It was why it took me a long time to get published. It took me 15 years. I was 24 when I started writing books. I was 40 when I got published. So it was a bit of a
Yeah.
wait. But it was because I was writing weird books. But when it comes to bucket list stuff, I have the bucket list. It's right up there. It's actually on
Oh
my wall.
wow.
What's really funny about it is it doesn't say bucket list, it says 2023. So apparently I'm impatient. But the graphic stuff is the first thing. I want to really get into writing graphic scripts for graphic novels. I have I have 2 short stories I'd really like to transpose, and they would make unbelievable, beautiful graphic novels. I can't draw those, so I would just be
Yeah.
able to do the scripts and go from there. I shouldn't say I can't draw. My drawing isn't great, nor is it fast. That's what I should say.
Yeah.
And then I have a picture book that I have half written, and that sounds like a weird thing to say as a bucket list, but it's totally out of my like. I got into this, and I've been working with teens, and I love working with teens, but I really want to start working with younger kids and talking in really fun ways about stuff that I'm talking about now, right? So like,
Yeah.
how do we talk about shame, but with a 5-year-old so that they can understand that everybody makes mistakes, right? How many picture books are about that? Like many, right?
Hmm.
But that kind of thing, like open those discussions. And so that's really my bucket list is more like kind of where I can write. And honestly, everything, like everything,
Yeah.
but I don't know, I've never dreamed of writing a romance, but outside of that, no offense to romance writers or a Western. But yeah, for me, it's getting into graphic stuff and even getting into, I'd really like to write a play. I have
That would be fun.
my favorite author when I was younger, and who influenced me is a guy named Paul Zindel, and he wrote a play called oh, you would love it, and you can get it in the library. Go and find it and read it. It's called The Effect of Gamma Rays on Man in the Moon Marigolds. Long title.
Yeah.
Won a Pulitzer. It won the Pulitzer Prize
Wow.
for and it was for not for, it was about kids, and he wrote young adult work, and this play is absolutely the two main characters, a teenager in school, but it's stunning, it's short, it's beautiful, but I'd like to get into that. I don't quite know how, but that's kind of a bucket list thing. Other than that, I write to Joe Biden every now and again, more about some of the stuff that I
Yeah.
deal with in more my volunteer life, but so far he hasn't written me back, so we'll see. Maybe we can get Joe on the line one day.
Yeah. And if you ever need an illustrator, don't ask me. I am like you. Never ask me. You should. There are a lot of people that are way, way, way. I can't say better because all art is great. Not mine, but most art is great. Um, but there are. I think that one of your books being a graphic novel or a picture book, I think that opening up the conversation for even younger kids is like beyond important, and also something that that's really, I guess, like you said, surreal, because I feel like there are a lot of picture books that don't necessarily tackle the kind of topics that they make kids feel, not necessarily feel, but they make kids seem dumb. But we are not dumb, and
No.
I think you writing a picture book about these sort of topics in a fun way would be
Right.
just awesome. And I would want to read that because picture books are for everyone. And yeah.
Well, there's things we don't talk about, right? So right now I'm
Mhm.
working on an early reader series, so that'd be still pretty young, but it's about community grief, and I think that community grief is a thing because we lose people in our communities, and how communities come together is beautiful, and but also often kids are left out of all grief conversations and all loss conversations. And I work with grieving people. And so because I work with grieving people, I see that young people need to have the language and more importantly, have extended to them the space to grieve and feel, and not feel like they're in the way and all that kind of stuff. So, and again, it's not to say there's not books out there about that. There are a good few, but I would like to add to that canon. I would like to talk about those things. So, and not necessarily the way you approach it for younger kids is kind of more fun, but yeah, I also have a picture book about cats who are pastry chefs. So totally not heavy at all.
Yeah.
So it's like, but that's the whole point is to have fun. I'm also like my author bucket list, no, but like I'm a painter, I'm a visual artist from the beginning. I was a photographer, that's what my degree is in, and so I've been painting for a long time, and not much because of a bunch of different things, but I'm about to just absolutely go bananas in that arena, and I'm really excited. So it sounds like it's not the same thing, but art feeds art, so I think the art in the studio is going to feed the art here, and the two end up like almost incentives for the other. I just talked to my editor yesterday, and I told him about the project I'm working on. I was like, and once I finish this novel for you and get it off my desk, I get to paint for a whole month. And he's like, that sounds like a good reward. And I was like, that's how we do it. We use it as a reward system.
Well, that cats making pastry sounds perfect.
Oh,
I had to hit you with that.
oh, that's hardcore. That's great. Oh, puns are my thing. I love it.
Yes.
Love it. Pandemonium. It is.
Certainly. They're very punny and there are lots of pun to make. I'm sorry.
No, don't be sorry. I love it. I love every single pun that ever was made.
No, I'm saying sorry to my dad who has to edit this. He hates my puns.
Oh no, he doesn't hate your puns. I know he doesn't, because your puns are awesome. He just shakes his head like this because puns make you shake your head like this.
They do. And This is what I wanted to ask you a rapid fire question that I've been kind of wanting to ask you since the author fan face off. So you mentioned that you're a huge punk rock fan,
Mhm.
and I I've also been dabbling into some punk rock since that. I'm a huge fan of the Ramones, and
Okay.
my dad also told me like what punk rock like the because I thought that there's some bands were punk rock, but I was like, oh, they're not. Okay, so it's good to have a dad who's in his 50s,
Yes,
when
it
it comes
is.
to this sort of thing. Well, what's your favorite? I don't know necessarily what your eras are, but like, what's your favorite band from each decade that you listen to music from, or
Holy smokes. Oh, that's going to be impossible to answer, but I'll start with look, the first things first right there, and you can see it on my screen, but other people won't. But I love Jimi Hendrix. So right there, that covers the
mm-hmm.
60s for us.
The Jimi
Um,
Hendrix Experience, awesome.
I'm in love with Jimi Hendrix. I'm an absolute freak for him. I'm also a big Bob Marley and the Wailers fan, big, which is going to interestingly point to my punk preference, which is Bad Brains. That's absolutely punk. And they are, um, I don't know. They're out of control. They're raucous. Got to see them live a few times. Pretty amazing. I wouldn't call Fishbone pure punk. I'm not sure what to call Fishbone. They'd certainly do punk. I mean, listen to Subliminal Fascism. That's punk. But they also do other stuff. But Fishbone I've seen live a few times. They're so tight. They're one of the best bands out there. And other than that, let's see, punk. I love some Iggy Pop and the Stooges. I love Early Pretenders, which would be a mix between rock and punk. I don't know how to explain them, but the early ones, the first two albums, pretty much. And I just finally got into Patti Smith. It took me years. I really like. I don't know what to say. Patti Smith is. She's all over the place, but she's so all over. She does so much. She's so versatile. She is punk just because of that. She's on. And then of course she wins the National Book Award with one of the best memoirs you'd ever read in your life. So it's kind of amazing, right? How
Mm-hmm.
versatile and how kind of stunningly intelligent and versatile she is. But those would be my main ones when it comes to punk. I'm in a big reggae bucket for probably I don't know, years now. So that's where I am at the moment. But that's where Bad Brains comes in because they're a mix. They're punk rastas. You gotta love that. So
Well,
yeah.
now my Alexa's gonna be full of some awesome bands.